This truck is now a year old. We've had this truck for just over a year at this point, and we have put an astounding 43,000 miles on this truck in that last year. Now, I've literally taken this truck to the ends of the world, and I will talk all about that in today's video, but we're going to talk about this thing as a whole, the ownership experience. Is this a good truck? The pros, the cons. Not everything is peaches and rainbows, and I'm going to share all in today's video. So make sure you stick around to the end, because literally so much to unpack in this one, and I cannot wait to share all of it with you, because you might be surprised on how it's been. End of 2019, Tesla rolled out the most surprising, the most polarizing, and the most incredible new look in a pickup truck. This was the Cybertruck. At the end of 2019, we got our first glimpse of this. This truck promised to be everything. It was going to start at $40,000. It was going to have 500 miles of range. It was going to be faster 0 to 60 than most supercars. This truck was going to do it all, and it was going to be affordable. Now, fast forward to 2023, the end of 2023, we got our first customer deliveries, and we finally had an idea, what are we talking about with price? Unfortunately, prices went through the roof, and what was being delivered was not exactly what was promised. That said, we initially had what they called a Foundation Series. Now, not too unlike other manufacturers, you could only get the Cybertruck at first as a special edition. The special edition came with absolutely everything that you could possibly get in this thing, automatically equipped, other than you could have it in two trims. You could have an all-wheel drive, or you could have a Cyberbeast. Of course, mine is an all-wheel drive, and it is a Foundation Series. That Foundation Series badge cost $20,000. And at the time, if you compare everything that comes with it and stack it onto the price, it wasn't that bad of a deal. But prices have changed since then, and other things have changed that really impact the value of this car. So let's break this down for you, because I want to show you how much I paid for it, how much it was worth at that time, versus how much it's selling for now. And then even look at it if you got the same options. So like I said, we have the all-wheel drive Foundation Series. So it started at $79,990, and that is what it is today. Add $20,000 for the Foundation Series, and you're talking $99,990. That's right, $100,000 pickup truck. A far cry from what was originally announced. Now, to be fair, that $20,000 package did include a number of paid features. Those included things like the Cyber wheels, which is $3,500, white interior, which is $2,000, full self-driving at the time was $12,000, mobile connector for $300, gateway for $2,500, all-weather liners for $300, gear locker divider for $45, sunroof shade, D-rings, L-track hooks, L-track bottle opener, center console tray, etc. All of which came up to about $20,000, actually just a bit over $20,000 at the time that Foundation Series was being sold. Now, since then, full self-driving has gone down $4,000, so in today's money, we're talking $16,800 or almost $17,000 in options. So today's price of the all-wheel drive, still $79,990. Add in $16,000 in options, you're talking about $3,000, $3,200 in extra costs that I paid to have the Foundation Series versus what you can buy today. But that's not where it ends. Unfortunately, for those of us who have the truck, the tax credit is now out there. That is a $7,500 tax credit for EVs that are made here in America, and the truck certainly qualifies for that. This tax credit gets you an extra $7,500 at point of sale directly with Tesla if you get the base configuration all-wheel drive. That'll bring $79,990 down to $72,490. So at this point, we're now talking $27,500 difference in what you can buy this truck today versus what I paid for it, excluding the options. So looking back at what Tesla originally announced, this particular trim was supposed to have about 300 miles of range, and it was supposed to go 0 0 to 60 around what it's getting now, and it was going to cost about $50,000. So at $80,000, it's $30,000 more, but you do get a little bit more range. And in this case, when we took delivery, it was rated for 318 miles with the Cyber wheels, which has now been dropped to 314 miles with the Cyber wheels. But if you get the base core wheels, you're talking 325 miles of range, both of which are a far cry from the top tier expected 500 miles of range. Now, at announcement, Tesla did address this with what they called a range extender. This range extender was a box that would be placed permanently, semi-permanently in the bed of your truck, and this was going to take about a third of the bed. This was going to boost your range to originally 470 miles, and then that was since dropped to 440. That has officially been canceled as of last month, which is terrible news for those of us who were really hoping to be able to add this to get the range that we were hoping for. Additionally, Tesla did release what they're now calling the rear-wheel drive version. This trimmed down version is going to come $10,000 discount, which is shy of the $18,000 discount we had expected based on when customer delivery started. Tesla promised this truck was going to come about $61,000, and it's now $70,000, so a $9,000 difference even from when customer delivery started. But this trimmed down version, they literally took a ton of stuff out of the truck. $10,000 reduced. You don't get air suspension. You don't even get a tonneau cover or the vault, the fixed vault. You can pay extra to have a fabric one in place. You miss out on some of the digital lighting features in the vehicle. All of that gets stripped out and so much more. However, you do get more range because they have reduced weight. We're talking 350 miles, or with the Cyber wheels, 331. So range is actually really good on that version. Price, not so much. And now we're here in the truck to talk about the absolute best part about having a Cybertruck, and that is the overall performance. Now, the performance of this truck comes in several categories, the way that I see it. And it's not just about acceleration, it's about what all this vehicle can do and how it does it comfortably. So starting off, of course, you cannot talk about Cybertruck without discussing the absolutely insane performance that this thing is capable of. Now, our truck right here is an all-wheel drive, does 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, which is insane. And the Cyberbeast, of course, does 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds, which is faster than some supercars out on the road. Now, it does this in a way that is so hard to comprehend. And this is where I argue, until you actually physically drive a Cybertruck, you're not going to understand why people love it. And that is something you just have to experience for yourself. Everything I'm about to talk about, it all falls under that category. That insane acceleration coupled with a battery pack that's super low to the ground gives you some pretty interesting cornering capabilities in such a big vehicle. This thing weighs almost 6,500 pounds and it can take turns like crazy. Now, this isn't as low to the ground as a Model 3 or a Model Y, so it does have some body roll, but it does things that trucks just should not be able to do when it comes to on-track performance. Looking at the inside of the cab, these seats are so comfortable. I tie them for first place in all of Tesla's seats, and I think the first generation Model Y takes the cake for the most comfortable, but these are almost as plush, and they come with cooled seats, which in the South is a huge plus. And that's how this thing comes up tied for first place. It's very comfortable, and although it does have nice bolstering to keep you in your seat, it's not overly aggressive. And because of the size of the cab, it's a pretty large truck. It is every bit of a full-size truck. That gives us a lot of space, so comfort for all passengers is really good, especially in the back seat. Probably the best back seat that Tesla has today is in the back of the Cybertruck. Now, while you're cruising down the road, this thing also has Tesla's best suspension. This suspension is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. Of course, we know adaptive suspensions for some time now, but this is something else entirely. The suspension on this, of course, is a 4-corner airbag suspension, and that is all controlled by software, which means it can do some pretty magical things. This suspension is so comfortable, no other Tesla, and certainly in my ownership experience, no other vehicle vehicle has driven this smooth on the road. When you add in the fact that this thing is surrounded by really good weather seals and really good soundproofing with the windows, it's a super quiet, super smooth ride inside of this truck. Thinking about the performance of this truck, you can't talk about Cybertruck and not talk about two extremely cool features that are pretty new in vehicles, and that is steer-by-wire and four-wheel steer. Now, four-wheel steer has been available in some vehicles, and steer-by-wire, this isn't the first time it's ever been used, but it certainly is at this volume, and it is something magical that you just have to experience for yourself. The amazing thing about having steer-by-wire is not only can you get some very precise turning capabilities, but you can actually do that depending on your speed. So when you're going slower, you might need to turn the wheel more to get turned. When you're going faster, you might need to turn the wheel less to get more turn. And it's all controlled by software. And that with the four-wheel steering makes a duo untouched by anything else I've ever seen, especially in a truck. That four-wheel steer in the back, when we first got this truck, had some level of capability, and 3 or so months after, they unlocked even more turning radius on the rear, all with software. And that is what is so cool about that. A recent software update also added the smoothness factor of the steering of this truck. So when you are going at slower speeds, it does try to behave a little bit more smooth than when it originally came out. And those are just those minor enhancements that we've come to love about Tesla ownership. Now, steer-by-wire is different, and it does take some getting used to. And almost everybody that I've let drive this truck, when they first start turning, they're a little bit surprised. They weren't expecting it to turn as much as it did, so it catches them off guard. And that does slow down the turning radius when you go faster. So it's very different, but after you've experienced it, you have to ask yourself, why don't all cars have steer-by-wire? Because this is pretty incredible. And that brings us to towing, and I want to talk about this because steer-by-wire comes into play with towing. EV trucks are not great for towing. They have an impact on range, just like gas cars do. And the impact, I argue, is basically the same. The difference is there's a gas station on almost every exit across the country, and many of those are set up in a way that it's very easy to get in and out when you are towing something. Charging stations are not the same. They are much farther spread out, and most of them do not have a setup that is well suited for towing. That means is, in many cases, you have to unhook to charge, and that is really a pain. The issue isn't necessarily the range it can do, it's that gap between chargers. So for example, when I was towing across the country from Utah to Florida, I could have made it probably 150 miles between stops, but the problem is through most of the country, the next charger is 80 miles. The charger after that is 160 miles. I'm not going to be able to make it 160, so I'm stopping every 80 to 100 miles, whether I need to or not. So you're driving an hour and a half, stopping for an hour to charge, driving for an hour and a half, stopping for an hour to charge, and that makes it very painful to travel long distance when you are towing. It actually took me twice as long to get to Florida from Utah as it would have if I wasn't towing, and that is based on numerous road trips that I've done without towing to know how far I can go in a day. I went closer to 500 miles a day rather than the typical 1,000 because I drive 16 to 18 hours a day when I'm doing long road trips, and it just works out well for me. I get about 1,000 miles in, not when I'm towing, and that is really painful. And that's something that's frustrating about the Cybertruck and its overall range. It was promised to be 500 miles, but we have a maximum of now 350 miles if you get the rear-wheel drive, but you also lose towing capacity there as well. That is not enough for towing, and the range extender was going to solve this, but that too has been canceled. So towing is really not so great. That said, when it is towing, it's unlike anything I've experienced before. There's some sort of voodoo magic happening in the rear with the rear wheel steer that is making this thing do something very incredible. The crosswinds and passing semis, all of that does not move this truck an inch. It is well planted while it's driving down the road, and I've never experienced anything like that towing, and I have towed a lot over the years. So the way that this truck tows is very different than any other truck I've ever towed with. The other thing about it, with that four-wheel steer, you're able to maneuver with the trailer in some ways that are very crazy. In tight spaces, this thing can just do incredible stuff. On top of that, one of the things I thought would be really awkward was having this brake right here on the right button on the steering wheel. I thought that was going to be so awkward, but it turned out to be so convenient. So if you ever needed to manually apply brakes, your hands are already on the steering wheel and you can hit it right there. And that's just brilliant. Rather than reaching across the dashboard to squeeze a button, you can just press it right here on the steering wheel, and that is actually really convenient and really cool. So let's talk about full self-driving while we're here. The full self-driving on the Cybertruck didn't get released until September, meaning when I took delivery in March, I had adaptive cruise control, and that's it. Nothing to keep the vehicle in its lane, no centering, no prevention from going off the road. None of that was available for many months. And when it did come out, it doesn't even have, even today, autopilot, basic autopilot not available. This version of full self-driving is not the same as it is in our Model Y. And that is a bit of a struggle because the way I explain the Cybertruck on full self-driving is it's almost like a driver who's buzzed, not drunk, but slightly tipsy. And they seem to want to hug the side of the lane. It will go over the line in some cases and not even worry about it. And it'll just sit there. And it's very frustrating when it does do that, but it won't go all the way over into the other lane and do something crazy like if it were drunk. So I say it drives like it's buzzed. Now in our Model Y, it is almost perfect every day, everywhere. This is not quite there. And that is something that's very clear if you have the opportunity to drive both the Model Y or Model 3 and a Cybertruck on full self-driving. It's just a different build and it's not as refined. Has a bit of ways to go to get caught up with what our hardware for Model Y does today. When it comes to range, this thing is actually rated at 318 miles when I purchased it. That's since been updated to 314 miles. And again, that's the all-wheel drive version. That is with these Cyber wheels installed, and that range has been pretty real. So at 30,000 miles, I did an updated range test on this vehicle. I did 70 miles an hour and went till it hit 0%. Some interesting findings were I ended up going 297 miles, and that is compared to the rated 314 miles. So really not that bad with 30,000 miles and 70 miles an hour, which is pretty awesome. That was all done with 116 kilowatt hours consumed. So again, I didn't go past 0%, and there should have been probably 6 more kilowatt hours available to me in that pack that I did not try to extract. But if you take the average consumption I had and you multiply that by the additional capacity that was probably there, I would have got basically the exact number that this thing is rated for, and that's at 70 miles an hour, which is really awesome. This is so much different than things used to be with Teslas when the rated range was nowhere near what you would expect to get in real world. That is now different, and that for the Cybertruck is awesome because when I go on road trips from Florida to Indiana, 1,000 miles, I do 2 less charging stops in the Cybertruck than I did with our previous Model Y. And that's a big deal. On top of that, we have some charging improvements. This thing is now able to do 325 kilowatts of charging at Tesla superchargers. That continues to enhance. And we've been teased that there is 500 kilowatt capable charging in this truck. It's yet to be seen when we're going to see that in real world. This thing charges so well, especially for a Tesla. There are other vehicles that charge faster, there's no doubt about it. But for the Tesla ecosystem, the worry-free, plug-and-play charging experience, there's nothing better than this vehicle right here. I really have enjoyed road trips in this vehicle, mostly because of that charging performance. When it comes to the fun stuff, off-roading specifically, this thing is unlike any other vehicle I have ever owned to off-road. This thing is incredible. Software is a big piece of that. The suspension being able to raise up to 17 inches of clearance or drop all the way down to 8 inches of clearance. It has so much flexibility. You also have locking front and rear differentials all by the press of a button on the screen. We also have the ability to turn four-wheel steer on or off when you're off-roading, and you have the ability to put all the power to the front or all the power to the rear, whatever you need in that situation. Baja mode is set for us to go a little bit faster on, say, sand or slightly smoother off-road conditions where you're trying to go fast across terrain. Overlanding is for when we're trying to go over some obstacles across the terrain, and it does such a good job giving you access to so many customizations to be able to really set this thing up however you want it to perform. So if you want a more plush ride, you can have that. If you want more clearance, you can have that as well. That all is possible thanks to software and off-road mode in this truck. Trail Assist is something we recently got, and what that is basically cruise control for off-roading. I've never experienced anything like this. You can literally put Trail Assist on, set the speed you want it to go over all these obstacles, and this thing will literally climb rocks all on its own. It will figure out exactly what it needs to do at each wheel to figure out how to get over this obstacle all automatically. And what's brilliant about that is a lot of people who may not have a lot of experience off-roading now have the confidence that they're able to try it, and the vehicle will help them along the way. And that's really important for the sport as a whole. I want off-roading and I want all that stuff to continue, and the only way that stuff is going to continue is if we give more people into the sport and we get them excited about off-roading. That's how we keep it alive, and that's how we make it expand from what it is today. That was further evidence for the overall capability of this truck. When I took delivery of it, I set a goal, and that goal was achieved. I drove 13,000 miles round trip from Central Florida to the northwest corner of Canada, all the way to the Arctic Ocean. And along that route, we took the Dempster Highway, a pretty notorious road built on permafrost. There's no asphalt. It is the bumpiest, tire-chewing, car-consuming road in North America. It is pretty intense. That 450, 500 miles, this truck did it with no problem at all. And along the way, we installed some chargers. So those who want to do it after us, everything's set up and you don't have to think about it. So this truck did that at the very early days before there was a lot of support in parts availability, and a lot of things could have gone wrong, and this thing did it flawlessly. Not a single hiccup on that entire incredible 13,000 miles. And now I want to talk a little bit about efficiency and charging as a whole. As you can see, we're at one of these new V4 charging sites, which gives us access to up to 325 kilowatt charge rate, and that is pretty awesome. What's not so awesome is when people do this. Like, why? Why do people do this still? I don't understand. And while we're sitting here charging, I want to talk about efficiency, because this truck is the most efficient EV truck on the market today. Now, that is really saying something, because this is very heavy. The R1T is very close, but it does weigh a bit more, which has an impact on it, of course. But when it comes to miles per kilowatt hour, this thing takes the cake. And yet that R1T barely beat the Cybertruck with only a 14-mile range difference between the two, which in real world is pretty crazy. The battery in that R1T is much larger than the one that is in here in this Cybertruck. And that is a testament to the efficiency of this truck. And that is something that Tesla has always had somewhat of a lead on in the industry. The Cybertruck is no exception. Now, in my own personal driving, this is what I experience. Of course, you see my truck, I have a rack on it, I have all this stuff on it that does not help with efficiency, and that is very true. But what I do find is when I'm driving the Cybertruck without the rack and I'm driving 80 miles an hour, I'll average about 475 watt-hour per mile. That's the equivalent of about 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. On the other hand, with the rack and everything else on top of the truck at, say, same 80 miles an hour, I'm doing more like 575 1 hour per mile. And that equates to something like 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour. What that all boils down to in the real world is, with the rack and everything else on here at 80 miles an hour, I'm probably going to do about 210 miles at 100%. Without the rack and everything else at 80 miles an hour, I'll do about 260. So about 40 less miles than I do when I'm doing 70 without the rack. And this is where a lot of EVs shine bright, and that is the cost to operate. Of course, no oil changes. There's a lot of maintenance that you get to skip on by having an electric motor rather than a gas motor or a diesel motor. But even just the fuel to take you places is so much cheaper in an electric vehicle, and in trucks, that can actually be a huge difference in total cost. There are some exceptions to that, like the Silverado EV, which is a mammoth of a truck, weighs more than a dually. That thing is a consumption-hungry truck. There's nothing wrong with that until you get on the highway and have to use DC fast chargers, because it's actually going to be more expensive than driving a diesel truck while you're hauling a load down the road across the country, and that's not so great. But if you're exclusively charging at home, it can be very economical, especially in comparison to a similar full-size truck on the market. Now, for my experience, I want to put a couple caveats out there. This truck, I have had free supercharging because I used a lot of my referral credits to buy supercharging miles, and I still have those credits and I'm still consuming those. So I have not paid for supercharging in this truck, and most of my charging has come from supercharging because of all the road trips. So this is the breakdown of my charging and my cost of ownership so far. So in that 43,411 miles, I have consumed 23,365 kilowatt hours and a lifetime average of 538.2 1 hour per mile. The breakdown is something like this: 11% of that time at home charging, 74% of the time at superchargers, and then 15% of the time other. And those others would be third-party chargers, chargers at hotels, city chargers where it's not on the Tesla network, but it's free charging. So I didn't pay for any of that. So when you break all that down, my real spend was something like $335. Now, if I was driving an equivalent full-size pickup truck, and we assume it's not a diesel, at 20 miles per gallon on average, I would have consumed 2,170.6 gallons of fuel in that same 43,000 miles. Now, if you average the gas price out by month in this time period, and you say those 43,000 miles were evenly distributed, that fuel cost would have been $8,608 in gas. So in my case, I saved like $8,300 in comparison to if I would have done the same exact stuff with a gas truck. Now, let's assume I didn't get free supercharging in that time, and I paid the average of about 35 cents a kilowatt hour for the supercharging consumption I did. That would have brought my total cost up to $6,071 for supercharging, plus the $335 for home charging, or $6,407 total, about $6,400 in electricity. And that is the actual power consumed for charging, which does have loss. So even then, it's $2,200 cheaper. So it's about a quarter cheaper with mostly supercharging, which is pretty cool. If you do this all at home, though, this can really save you some big bucks. Now, as it sits today, maintenance hasn't been crazy for my truck, but I am here to tell you everything that I've had to do with this truck regarding maintenance, bringing it here to Tesla to get something fixed, something done, even if it's a recall. All of that, let's talk about it. So with this truck, like I said, I've been pretty lucky, but it doesn't mean I haven't had issues. This truck has had 19 days in service since we took delivery last year. And yeah, that's probably more than average, but this is the first year production of a new vehicle, so it's not uncommon to have more issues. My issues have been pretty minor. Some people have had to replace motors, all kinds of weird, bigger issues like that. My biggest issue was a suspension failure that I had, which in this day and age is actually really rare. Air suspensions used to be riddled with issues, very complicated, hard to do. But air suspensions today are so good. This one, I just had one corner that had to be replaced because for some reason it wouldn't hold air anymore randomly. And in about 2 or 3 hours, it would completely deflate. That was replaced, of course, under warranty. Now, we had our initial appointment where we addressed some of the issues with alignment of panels and gaps and things like that. Nothing major, but more like lining up the doors a little bit cleaner, stuff like that. Since then, we've also had the top of our bed here, the bed rail cover, completely fly off. It actually happened while I was driving in Indiana. It flew off, and fortunately, thanks to the team there in Indianapolis, they were able to get me back on the road with a temporary fix. I was able to make it to Michigan, where I was headed, and it did indeed fly right off again up there, unfortunately. So it didn't last very long, and then eventually I had to come back and get it completely replaced. I also was fortunate enough to be able to get the Cyber tent, and it was quite an experience. You can check out more details on that here, but the Cyber tent I had came broken, so I had to come back and get it replaced after my trip when I finally got it. I've had to have all 4 lower fairings replaced because they broke on the highway. I also got this truck missing some components that came with Foundation Series, including D-rings in the bed. Of course, like all other Cybertruck owners, I had to wait for my wheel covers to arrive. Those did finally come at one point, and then now I'm faced with, unfortunately, the biggest windshield replacement I have ever faced. This windshield, I did get a crack. I can't believe it, but this all happened up in the Arctic North, and finally the crack up top gave way and did indeed spread all the way down the windshield. And this is not a small issue. This windshield is going to end up costing $2,700 to replace, which you probably could have guessed because it is humongous. And I'm sure it takes 2 or 4 people to even put this on as a team. This is super unfortunate. What was originally going to be bulletproof glass didn't end up making it into production, and unfortunately, I am a culprit of a broken windshield. Of all the maintenance that I've had, there's only been 2 recalls on this. One of them was an early recall when it was the accelerator where a rivet was placed in. Apparently, some portion of vehicles, they didn't install the cover on the accelerator pedal correctly, so it could slide forward and lock the accelerator in a go position. That was done, unfortunately, and looks terrible, but they've since revised that, I believe, to a much better solution. And then the other recall was for, it happened to be another issue I was facing. The windshield wiper actually would rattle in the wind. It was the weirdest thing ever. They had to replace the motor, which was the recall, but they went ahead and replaced the arm for me as well as the blade. So since then, it's been problem-free, but I can imagine the stresses that are put on a 4-foot windshield, because when it is deployed and it's in the down position at 80 miles an hour, there is a lot of force on that thing going up and down. So bringing this all full circle, here are my final thoughts on this. Here's the good stuff. For starters, this thing has some amazing tech built into it. Some of the tech in this truck have never been seen in a vehicle ever before. And I'm not just talking about the stainless steel exterior. First and foremost is that steer-by-wire. That is absolutely incredible. As I've said, it does take some getting used to, but this is how vehicles should be made. We have 4-wheel steer, which makes this thing even more maneuverable than my Model Y, which is crazy to think. Again, the most smooth riding Tesla made today is the Cybertruck. This is literally the only full-size truck with a 6-foot bed that will fit in a standard garage. That's incredible. 6-foot bed is awesome. Usually full-size trucks that might fit in your garage, they all come kind of standard with a 5.5-foot bed, roughly there, plus or minus a couple of inches. No 6-foot bed full-size truck fits in a standard garage, and that actually adds quite a bit of awesome utility to this vehicle. Gives you some more flexibility on what all you can do with this thing. And speaking of utility, there's no doubt, no question at all that this thing is a do-it-all vehicle. No other truck is as capable as this thing on the road and off the road. This thing can do so many things all in one package, and that makes this truly an incredible utility vehicle. As I've shown you already, the interior is not just comfortable, but so quiet. This is at the top of what Tesla's delivering today in cabin noise, as well as just overall comfort, whether it's the seats, having cooled seats, the cushioning on the seats, or getting your whole family in here with enough space that everybody feels comfortable. This truck really hits all the marks there. And then finally, the best stereo I have ever heard in a vehicle. Now, people are going to argue about this, and I will agree it's somewhat subjective. However, you cannot deny how incredible the stereo is in this truck. This is, in my opinion, the best stereo on the market, and there's no name badge on those speakers. There's no Bose, there's no whatever, all these upgraded prices that you pay for having a name brand on those stereo. It just proves that that stuff doesn't really mean much. This is next level, and it was incredible engineering that brought that to life. Now, like I said, it's not all great though. There are some cons here. First and foremost, the most important con, this thing is so expensive. $80,000 is not an entry price. $70,000 is not an entry price. Those prices are far high and above what we expected from delivery day. A $40,000 truck that did all these things, even with limited range, that will sell. A $70,000 truck that kind of does those, maybe a little bit more, that is not the formula that we thought we were going to get. This is an $80,000 truck. I will stand here and say it gives you $80,000 in value, especially compared to what's out there, especially if you lump in the tax credit. Compared to a gas vehicle, you get similar stuff in the vehicle, but a lot more capability. So from that perspective, I don't disagree that it's not worth it. It's just that it's so expensive. Depreciation is a real hard point for a lot of people. A lot of people have been burned over the last couple of years with Tesla, whether it's the Model Y, certainly the Cybertruck. They absolutely went haywire with the Foundation Series on this thing. They tried to make as many as they could, which I don't disagree with, but they never stopped the spigot. So when demand for a $100,000 truck started to collapse, they didn't slow down production. So even today, there are Foundation Series trucks available to purchase. No matter what anybody tells you, full self-driving in this Cybertruck does not behave, does not perform the same as it does in our Model Y. They both have hardware for, but the full self-driving on this truck, it just doesn't perform as well. And it does do things great, but it also feels like it's certainly a step behind the Model Y and 3, and that is really disappointing. The range, although it is good in comparison to, say, the Model Y or the Model 3, if you do want to tow, forget it. This thing is not worthy of towing because of the limited range, and you don't have any ability to add to that. Specifically when you're in the middle of the country, this is just not enough range. We certainly expected this thing to have 6 seats, and that was a huge deal. Having 5 seats is normal, and that's fine, but if you have 6 seats, this all of a sudden accommodates so many more families just by having the flexibility of another seat in the front. The blind spot with the A-pillar is really frustrating. That is probably the worst part for visibility on this vehicle. Everything else is really good, so it's frustrating that it's such a big blind spot. And then, of course, the rear view mirror is, I think, a miss, especially at this price point. Just throw in a camera mirror up there. This is silly to not have it in it. And then finally, for some people, this is a loud vehicle. When you look at this thing, it screams, "Look at me." And for some people, that's going to be a huge turnoff. And certainly as of late, with some of the politics going on, some people have been subject to some very real hate, and that's not such a great thing. However, the flip side of that is there's nothing else on the road like this, and that's what's so cool about it. Overall, this truck outperforms most everything else on the market today, and that does include the dealership model. You do not have to pain yourself with the horrible experience of going to a franchise dealer to make this purchase. You do it all online. You pay the same price as everybody else. You don't have to haggle. You don't have to sit in a finance manager's office and listen to him explain to you why you have to have gap coverage. You don't have to deal with all the nonsense, and that is a huge plus for a lot of people, myself certainly included. If money is not an issue and you're not stretching yourself and you want the latest, greatest tech on the market, this truck is for you. If you're already stretching yourself to get this and you don't typically have a pickup truck, I think the Model Y is a way better purchase. #1 selling car in the world for good reason, and it has a lot of capability, a lot of utility, not quite what this thing can do, but it is a way better purchase than this, probably, if you are really stretching yourself. That said, when I have the option of picking which car I'm going to drive for the day, it's the Cybertruck every single time. I love driving this thing. It's so much fun to drive. does so many things so well, and it really is like experiencing the future right now. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. This truck has been very polarizing, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on it. I think that this truck in many regards is an absolute home run, and in some regards it falls short. That's what makes it so challenging and so difficult. I have no doubt in my mind this is a once-in-a-lifetime vehicle. We will never have a vehicle as cool, as unique, as different as this in our future, and I think that that's what makes this thing so cool. So let me know your thoughts. I thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to catch you on the next one.